You there? You're there, Steven. We're here.
Works like magic, huh? Am I the first that's attended on time, or something shocked you?
No, it's the first time that it's worked right away.
Well,
Yeah,
I've only been doing this for what, 2 years now, or some ridiculous amount of time. So
yeah. Well, it's not so much it's not the like tech thing for the calling stuff, but every episode. I mean, this is episode 8 of this. I've
cool.
had some small little technical problem with the recording software or a process running in the background on my computer or whatever. And so, anyways,
Very cool.
recording video locally is apparently a resource hog on your system. So,
Right.
anyways,
I
so
hear you.
well, thanks for joining.
Sure.
Let's jump in, man. Let's get started. Just to kind of do a quick intro for those that are folks that are listening and watching. Stephen, you are the CEO, founder, starter of the Element Blue company group. Element
Yep.
Blue, we'll just call it that. Tech space is where your focus is. You guys have been in what? Oil and gas, healthcare, all over the place, right?
Yeah. We're still supporting energy, retail, and healthcare, but predominance is healthcare, and our focus is marketing and development within the healthcare arena primarily today as a go-to-market. But we're still supporting lots of other businesses in our heritage of 20 years. So
Yeah. So
yeah.
let's go back. Let's go back to the
Yeah,
20
yeah,
years ago. Um,
yeah.
where did it all start for you guys? Like, I mean, you've been in the tech space for, I mean, doing this for 20 years, but where did it start before that? Like, what got you into starting this company?
Uh, Getting a pink slip at another company, you know. I mean, seriously, I had to walk out of another company with the dot bomb, and took out a business card and decided that the practice that had failed or went belly up for other reasons within that company, I could restart with my name on the card, and they didn't
Yeah,
have any problem with that, right? They had the lights out with about 60 people in it in the end of near the middle part of 2000. I think it was actually March of 2000.
okay,
So the two guys in the truck story is we both were carrying, references with Lotus at the time.
yeah,
Started in that space in '93, and so we had enough consulting and system IT background with Lotus as a new client server applications in the day, or application platform in the day. I mean, you had companies like Enron running it. You had the Accentures, PwCs.
yeah,
It was big in the federal space, and so that started the generation of really what Element Blue is. We renamed the company in 2012. Prior to that, it was called Ixion.
okay,
And you're right. Primarily, we were energy, oil, and gas services. I mean, we were in the Houston market. Most of our dominant enterprise customers, being IBM aligned, were
yeah,
larger system companies. And yeah, I mean, the irony of it is that in '03, we won one of the largest contracts in the Lotus space, at least in the mid-continent. What we call kind of the lower middle market TOLA region within Lotus in 2003 with University of Texas MD Anderson.
hmm,
And then the generation of that project led us to Sean joined us in 2005 and is still with us today.
yeah.
So he's a managing partner and principal in the business, and we are the principals of and owners of that partnership now, Element Blue.
Yeah.
So
That's cool. That's one of the things I've always respected about your organization is that you've kept true to your roots in terms of like the people that you work with and the people that you have a part of it. I mean, I can't say enough good things about you and Sean and working with the teams that you guys build around you. You can really tell that like the people that we end up working with that you guys bring in for these agreements that we've had and transparency for those on the call. I mean, I've worked with you in two different organizations now, and if I ever move to another organization, I'll work with you there too if I can, you know. So it's going to be that kind of relationship. I've felt really strong about that, and it's nice because you guys, you can tell that between you and Sean, you guys gel really well together.
Mm.
You know, you've had a good run here with your company, and the people that come in on your teams, I think, feed off that as well, and it feels like you're working with people that care. Um, you know, from a tech perspective, you can't get a better reaction from somebody than from Sean and his team when it comes to outages. Doesn't matter what time of day it is, what time of night. I mean, it could be Sunday morning at 3 a.m. and there's an outage of some sort on our website or any kind of tech that we're working with. Like those guys are just like that on the spot and they care, you know, like they get it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you
I
know,
think we raised throughout our history raised a culture of ownership,
yeah,
right? Like we feel when we sign a piece of business that we own it as a part of a partnership with the company that we're doing business with, and we don't like getting up at that time or that hour, like anything,
sure.
right? And we can all talk about examples of that in our personal life too, of getting demands in the middle of the night to,
Yeah,
you know, feed the baby or whatever it is. So, I mean, we don't like those events, but we're bound to them. We signed an
right.
agreement, we signed a partnership with what we're committed to, and it's in our scope. It's if it's driving from a good relationship and a good aspect of when we exit it, right, with the end in mind, so to speak, right. We want to exit with referenceability
Right.
and the fact that you guys can reference us to anybody. And I think if you go into that, then you sign the right piece of business, right?
Yeah.
It's always nicer when you say, okay, this is repeat business, and hey, I get to work with Mike Lamb again, or Tyler again, or whomever it is you like working with. But also when you're signing new business, you're trying to you're trying to really understand, at least at our stage in the game, and our maturity and principles, that we're signing business with people we want to hopefully get something together from and value, and
Right.
they respect that as well, right?
Yeah.
So that they respect that we're waking up for them at 3 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
in partnership, right? Not that we're after it for the points, so to speak, of the relationship, but we're after it for that people respect the part of the mission that we're
Yeah.
accomplishing together. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I think that does come from all of that stuff we talk about, and there's big marketing push, obviously, in social media, especially LinkedIn, about leadership and culture and
Sure.
all those great pieces. But I've seen that pretty, I think more recently, like the last 3 years, with some of the companies that either accelerated, blown up, and then fallen apart, or are doing really well, especially through the pandemic, with the highlights of those principles, right?
Right.
And the leadership that led them through with some of the principles we just talked about. So it is interesting how just a few people at the top can make that difference throughout the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah. I mean, I can think back on every engagement with every company I've ever had that's gone south. And it's never about the work. It's
Mm.
always about the leadership of what's going on, the sense of urgency around the work, you know, whether it's like you're saying you sign an agreement that says you're going to do this work and then you come back and, you know, 6 months into a year-long project, you decide that you can't agree to those things anymore, and it's you're not going to hold your word or the contract, and you want to try to get out of it or some way, and it's like, you know, there's not any kind of relationship. It's always feels like somebody's trying to take advantage of the situation. And again, it's not back to the work. You know, it's like the technology people deploy and so forth all works great, but at the end of the day, if you don't feel like you have a good relationship with somebody where you can pick up a phone and call, and like, I mean, I feel that way with you guys. If I ever have an issue, pick up the phone and call you and we work it out, you know, and it's like I don't always have to win. You don't always have to win in the conversation, but like, you know, we figure out whatever this thing is that we need to solve for. And I think
Mm.
that's something that you know, I've tried to make sure I instill like within my teams and from a leadership perspective and the folks that I lead is to get them to understand that it's not about, you know, if you say you're going to do something, let's live up to it. Let's do it, you
Yeah.
know. And if you can't do something, it's okay. Like, let's talk about the fact that you can't do it. Like, you know, and that's something else I've respected about you guys is that you haven't come to me and tried to sell me something you can't do.
Mm.
Um, and so many agencies and so many companies do these days. They come in with the idea of, well, we think we can do this, or this is the first time we're going to do this, or this is what you want to hear to sign the contract. And then you get into it, and it's like, well, you can't do that. You know, you guys are
Yeah.
pretty clear up front. Like, we're not going to do this. We're going to do this, and we're going to nail this, but this other part we just don't do.
I think too, as I said, it's the evolution of where we stand after 20 years of business, knowing the pieces that maybe we are slow learners, but we got to at some point over the years, that maybe a couple of decades, to the point where we could say that, right? We could
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
okay, we don't want this, or we do want this, or we know and understand this. I do think, when Patrick and I set out to build the company, that's the original partner.
hmm
Um, we did kind of establish this quality around the brand. We wanted the brand and the company and the entity to stand for, we were going to hatch some good referenceable work. We
yeah,
saw so much stuff out there in the early .com days that, it wasn't built around the promises piece of what you were just saying, but more about just the quality of what the delivery of the digital experience
sure,
was in those days. We
yeah,
just called them sites, right? So,
yeah,
we're just like, really, people got that much money for that piece of work? And we were
yeah,
just like, so much to be had there. So the craftsmanship, if you will, of the brand and the quality that we wanted to hatch was one of the principles actually Patrick was built off of. And I think the people principle was something that I
yeah,
tried to live with in the delivery aspect.
yeah, yeah.
So,
In that early 2000s is when uh, so I graduated college in 2000, my undergrad, and around that time, I just happened to be working for a municipality around here, Parks and Rec department, and they're like, "Oh, you
mm,
have a college degree." They're like, "Do you want to become a manager? And do you want to run youth sports leagues and adult sports leagues? And you already work here as a like part-time person. Do you want a full-time job? We'll give you a
mm,
salary and benefits and retirement and all that." I was like, "Well, hell yeah! I don't even have to look for a job. Let's do that." And that wasn't what I wanted to do in life, but I was like, okay, money talks. I can do this while I work on some other stuff on the side. So around that like early 2000s phase is when I was doing websites on the side, and I was building all those, probably the crappy websites that you're talking about for people. And I was just, raking in the dough because everybody during that
right.
.com was just like, oh, we need a website. We need a website. And they didn't care what it looked like, how much you charged for it. Like, they didn't care if you were a one man shop. They just needed
Mm,
something to show up when you typed in a web address. Like, that was it, from my experience around then. So
yeah.
I was delivering those. And I ended up quitting my job at the city and was like, I'm done. I'm just going to do this on the side. And I did. I went and just started working on my side, doing that for a few years. And then, which is where I ended up. I got to the point with it where I was burned out, and I started to see that thing that you were talking about, where it's like the quality of work that I was leaving behind, I wasn't proud of. And I was like, you know what? I either have to grow and start a company and like pull people in, or I
Mm,
need to get out and do something else. And my heart just wasn't in it. I just was like, at the time, I was like, I don't need to be running a company. Like, this is not for me. Like, I just want to do work and sit in a dark
right.
room, feed me sandwiches under the door, like, leave me alone and let me work.
Yeah.
Um, and so I ended up quitting. I ended up just folding up shop and saying, okay, I'm done. And I went and got a job at Children's Medical Center, and eventually that's where we ended up meeting later, a couple years later, after working
See,
there.
when did
But
you start children's?
um, let's see, I can't remember the year actually. I was there for 9 years.
Oh, okay. So
Um,
yeah, okay, early
yeah,
2000. And
so
yeah.
early 2000. I was there for 9 years. I've been here at Mitel, actually, as of today. If I look at the
Wow.
calendar, yeah, as of today, 6 years as of today.
Oh, wow. The
So,
anniversary.
yeah, so June 8th for those that are watching later. Um, yeah, so, it's been a good run. I mean, I think, yeah, we worked together for a couple of years before I left
Sure.
Children's, doing the web implementations and stuff there. getting us on
Yeah.
the IBM WebSphere platforms.
Right. Yeah.
Man, what fun, huh?
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
um,
Exactly.
those website migrations are crazy. It's that was one of the reasons that I came to Mitel, is to help them with that digital transformation of that stuff, and their marketing stack. And we've got it in this like great space, and it's like, I think this is starting to get in my career where it's the first time I've been able to complete a full project like that and then see all of the fruits of my labor like into a couple of years and really start to hone things in, and not just be like, oh, let me just upgrade and do this and get the new site and then it's on to the next project or next thing. So
Yeah.
it's been
Yeah.
nice.
It is interesting to think about the life cycle of things now with the age of our careers, right? I mean, it is interesting to one, look at the technology and all the MarTech and the horizontal players, right? And there's
Yeah.
guys out there, analysts that are making maps of that, you know, and keeping up with all that. But it's also, like you said, you described, which is watching one develop through the implementation and being around long enough and seeing some stabilization
Yeah.
within the program to go, oh yeah, this is what we dreamt up, you know, to build,
Yeah.
you know, 2 or 3 years in, and then hatch some value from. We so often see that, you know, the length of time it takes to build that story, the politics change,
Yeah.
the acquisitions happen, you know, I would say darn near more than half of the time,
Right.
right? That there's an unraveling or some other new road to go down within the digital, you know, story, that you're like, wow, when are we gonna? So it's great to hear. It's great to
Yeah.
hear that, you know, you see that you've experienced it now, and I think we experienced it at Children's too, where we got to some
Yeah.
stable pieces after a while
Yeah.
and relaunch and so
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah.
So it's never exactly nirvana, but you know, it's closer once you get the product, and a few best practices and experts at it. You know,
Yeah.
usually it just takes a handful or less.
Right.
That's the other thing, is some companies have to put armies of people behind it, and what we find is I classically say two pizza teams, right? You know, if you have
Sure.
bigger than two pizza teams, then you might be needing to rethink the deployment strategy. I don't care how big of an organization you are
Right.
with digital. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've found that too. It's interesting that when every transformation project that I've done, it's always, you sit down, like you say, and you have those big grandiose plans, right? Like you go in and you pitch the CEO, the CFO on like, I need to go invest $1 million in a web redesign. I need to move to a new platform, and you go through the process of all the conversations and all the planning and everything, and then you go in to do that, and you know on average, and maybe you can tell me if this is what your experience, but on average, a good redesign is going to take you 9 months if you're very aggressive. If you've got your shit together and you're getting after it, 9 months is going to be a good full site redesign on a new platform, new content, new everything, right? Like just getting after it. But you're not going to see in that 9 months. That's like day one, right? Like that's the day you're born.
right,
You still got to grow up, right? And the website still has to grow up. And what I think a lot of folks don't understand is that maturity model. You know, whenever the site launches, everybody's kind of like, okay, well, it's done. Let's wash our hands of this. Let's move on to the next thing. It's like, no, like you have to plan that investment. Like you have to plan that year two investment in those projects, because if you don't, then all that money and time you spent in the year to to get it launched and for it to be launched for 3 months is worthless, right? Like if you're not thinking year two and three in terms of like continual investment in honing
right,
it, SEO, design optimization, conversion optimization, like all of the other elements that go into those year two and three projects, um, you know, just honing the code, making sure everything's working the way it's supposed to, finding the bugs, hiccups and all that kind of stuff in the systems from deployment. Like the project's worthless, if you don't take that time to invest in that stuff.
yeah, yeah. I think absolutely, absolutely. In terms of the 9 months, the value story, all you went through, we kind of think of it at least in general journey buckets, right? B to E is where we started. I
Yeah.
mean, the most value from quote unquote portals, and that term came along in the late 90s, with application space that you could put on a web page and little boxes that you could surface different data elements. That business to employee space, kind of that heyday lasted until I say Steve Jobs, invented the iPhone.
Yeah.
So around 8, and then recession 9, and then 10, the recovery, you saw this big flip from B to E to business to consumer. And
Hmm.
then it was all about the app space and what are we going to do with our app space strategy. And so when you boil all that together and you're talking about a replatform and you're talking
Yeah.
about, especially then on to business to consumer, the business to consumer segment and commerce, yeah, you're in multi-year efforts. I mean, I remember we walked into a very large consumer products good manufacturer, global manufacturer, and their roadmap for replatforming was 5 years.
Yeah.
So that was a decommissioning of everything that they had in red boxes over to blue boxes,
Yeah.
basically, and purple in the middle. I've
Sure.
actually architected things that are purple, but from red box to blue box shift, and this story was a 5-year roadmap for them. So,
Yeah.
and even that was the birthing aspect, right? That was
Right.
still the whole birthing aspect in terms of that. Now, principally they went through phases where each year they hatched some value and in strategy and so forth. But you're right, these things take so long, and enterprises, especially at the Mitel size and so forth and up, are very long journeys.
Yeah.
I think the one of the things we classically used to say is probably is 10 years old now, but used to say that CIO's doors are moving closer and closer to the CEO's doors.
Yeah.
And certainly sometimes it's the CEO who's in a business to consumer environment really running the show. So
Right.
if the site goes down and the transactions go down, they're belly up anyway. So
Right.
but but they're next door to each other. And now you've got all these other funky names for C-suites like chief digital officer and chief
Sure.
innovation officer, and we've
Yeah.
kind of expanded the CIO
Right.
namespace to all these other things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that comes along with the fact that there's so much investment in on the marketing side of things, right? I mean, there's just so much tech investment there, and growth. I mean, just in new. I can't tell you how many, um, because I have a title of director in LinkedIn. I can't tell you how many phone calls and emails I get every day from people pitching their latest thing. It's their latest startup of whatever. And it seems like most of these people are coming in with very like niche problem solving. It's like they're not thinking big picture. They're not thinking how it does all the stuff. It's like we're coming in to solve this one little problem. And if we can just get you to put your credit card in for $100 a month, we'll turn this service on your website, and we can, put a chat bot up there, or, this or that. It's like these little bitty tiny things. And there's so much noise, from all these different products. It's really hard for me, to step back and make the calls and decisions on some of this stuff, because some of it you look at it and you're like, okay, well, it is $100 a month. I mean, I could just throw it on my credit card and just get this problem to go away for 6 months or a year while I have time to do something else. But usually when I do that, it's like that comes back to bite me, because 3 years later, I still have it on my credit card and I'm still using the same service and I still haven't solved the real problem, just put a band-aid on it. So, um,
And the fee went up to $300 a month. So
yeah,
you know,
it just slowly just crept up,
it's so right?
uh,
Where's
that's,
the subscription world, right?
yeah. Well, I mean, how has that changed for you guys? I mean, in terms of subscription stuff. I mean, it's historically it was you buy the box, you buy the license, see you
Yeah.
later, and now it's you get
So
to rent the box and the license, and you know,
well, it's a great question, Mike, and especially in healthcare, right? So,
yeah,
as you well know, right, there's this tremendous still sensitivity to the cloud, whether it's the regulatory, aspects of HIPAA and other
sure,
compliance factors for security and the chief security officer, or it's again still that whole I have all these hands and they're sitting around in a data center. They should be
yeah,
utilized, aspect of IT. Um, there's movement there. There's some institutions that we deal with that are moving faster than others. Children's, I would say, Children's Dallas and Children's Health System of Texas, if you will, they I think are always been one of the kind of the leading edge
Hmm.
systems, right? They
Yeah.
always, and I don't know if this was happening when you were there, but I just love the fact that they survey their vendors, for the
Yeah.
marketing team. It just feels like they are very forward thinking on how their relationship with vendors is, how they can keep innovative, how they can keep the cloud story as much as possible.
Yeah.
Um, Others, for various reasons, right? They haven't made the shift to the cloud, or they're kind of on the other end of the spectrum, if you will, with on-premise versus subscription or cloud model.
Yeah.
Um, I would say the most difficult part for us is the vendor space is just leaving them behind. They're saying we don't have an on-premise option, or if we do, it's a container architecture, and
Yeah.
you have to have this container architecture in your own environment and be able to support those layers, that
Sure.
hypervisor layer, or Kubernetes. Nowadays it's Kubernetes application space. So those container architectures where it helps them do continuous delivery on their side, continue to
Right.
support every customer on the cloud, but then just hatch these one-off products every quarter or half year.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, all the customers on the cloud get a release every 2 weeks, or
Yeah.
every some crazy phenomenal thing that like your Google Chrome browser does.
Yeah.
So that's kind of leaving healthcare in an interesting spot, right? I mean, I think as we continue to move down the era of where the latest and greatest solutions are, they're going to be cloud. And,
Yeah.
these, um, I would tell you a good example is in security. While that's so hot of a space, and right, we're talking ransomware attacks every
Yeah.
day. It's like that in the security space, you see Okta blow up because that's changed the model on passwordless and multi-factor and
Sure.
identity so forth management. That used to be an on-premise solution, right?
Right.
Now everything's shifted cloud. So what we've got in identity access and authorization management is a cloud-based solution looking back at legacy being on-premise, right?
Right.
And so they're taking the world in cloud management IDs for the enterprise. So anyway, this world is coming together, but I think no more than probably healthcare and government both have so much regulation that keeps them, pretty dealing with more complications around the effort of being a hybrid
Yeah.
uh, enterprise to software.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I did see that to back up to the beginning of that. I mean, I did see that when I was there. Uh, with the investment in tech and the investment of like keeping things moving forward. I mean, I felt like from a healthcare space that we were pretty much out there in the bleeding edge of adoption of stuff, as we were my team when I was there, starting to build apps, for asthma management and different things like that. And we're starting to get into the telemedicine space and so forth. So there was always that kind of investment in that piece.
Yeah,
Um, it's so interesting that, for healthcare, and this may be the part that's ripe for disruption in healthcare. It's just getting to figuring out what is that selling point, or what is that piece of tech that's going to make the security officers feel the most comfort and regulations that are out there to be able to start adopting the cloud more. I mean, every other industry is just like, yeah, hell yeah. We'll use that closet for something else. Like we don't need our PBX in there anymore under the elevator shaft. Let's move that out, and we can use that space for something else, right? A snack bar or something, right? It's like people are starting to understand that the benefit beyond just space of the release cycles and the updates and stuff that go along with cloud, and that the reliability and redundancy of that, and you know not having to have a guy having to drive to a data center somewhere when something goes down and pull a rack out and move something around. There's none of that going on. Like that's all just handled somewhere else. And so I think that's where it's going to get crazy with the healthcare industry, is that like you're saying, I think they are getting left behind. And just in the consumer space of healthcare now, not being working in it directly, I mean, I see it within the portals I use, the websites that I go to for the different, places that I use, it's so old school looking, it's not, it doesn't feel like you're in a modern world, right? It's like you feel like you've gone back a few days, or a few years or so when you get into that space.
When you're dealing with healthcare sites, websites, that's
Yeah.
what you're.
Yeah. Just going into different portals for, different providers and stuff that maybe a primary care or something like that. You have to log into their provider portal, and everyone has their own provider portal, and they all work differently, and they all look different, and they all authenticate differently, and they
Yeah.
all look old and janky. Uh,
Jake, that's true. So I would say that too, Mike, and maybe most of the audience doesn't realize this, but when you look at the back office side and the revenue cycle where we've been spending time, and you look at the aspect of reimbursement and claim processing, oh
yeah.
man, it's even worse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's even worse with their own homegrown systems and shuffling paper or data between one application and another. And that's where we've been spending a lot of our time. So they're trying their best on the consumer side of the market,
Sure.
or at least the ISVs like you're referring to in the EMR space. But when you get into the general handling of the business to business operation of claims
Right.
management, provider and payer, well, there it's just even decades behind, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like that's going to be the last thing we solve for because it's kind of the cobbler's shoes or internal bits that they'll have to figure out later.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where that's what's keeping us busy is RPA, the
Yeah.
automations.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So RPA is robotic process automation. That's right.
Yes.
Did I get it right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about what's going on in that space. I remember you bringing that to me a couple of years ago, or a year ago now. I mean, God, how
Right.
many? It was before COVID, so COVID's been going a year, probably 2 years ago now. It was the
Yeah.
last time I saw you in person.
Yeah. Yeah. So it came onto the scene first in the financial services sector, and it really was born out of the business process outsourcing, but it's almost 15, 20 years ago, right? So RPA software is just basically mimicking desktop motions that a human would do.
Yeah.
For the most part, that's the simplest way to think about it. A lot of people think macros, right?
Sure.
Sometimes I coin or recoin it like repetitive task automation.
Okay.
I'm doing the same task over and over and over, moving the mouse, between my email system, opening a PDF, scraping some data, putting it in a website. AP invoice processing is really, really popular for this. But the essence of it is if I've got thousands of these repetitive tasks to do, I've got an army of folks doing it, which is what happened in the business process outsourcing world. Their first item of business was to figure out how to automate that, right?
Yeah.
How to apply automation to that, reduce their costs from a human element perspective down to something that costs them virtually nothing to just run on a system 24/7.
Yeah.
Basically watch an inbox, pick it up, move it over here, plant some data over there, right? So it took off, insurance, financial services market, right? Those that were very large enterprise, global, had a lot of BPO going on. And what you saw was when there started to be commercially available software for this, we're talking about 7 years ago, at this point, real commercial availability and a market that was, total, even amongst those early stage players. I'm talking when it was less than 100 million in valuation between the three lead horses. You still had the biggest enterprises and the PwCs and Deloitte start to pick up on this, right? So
Yeah.
what you saw was an evolution into, like anything, kind of moving downstream into the market, and healthcare providers, where we mostly concentrate, now in deploying RPA, kind of picking it up about 5 years ago, I'd say,
Hmm.
at the earliest stage. So some of our common, in our space, and we primarily deal with one vendor who's very strong in the healthcare arena in RPA called UiPath.
Okay.
They're now public, went public last month. Very, very successful company, and really became the company when it talk about automation within the healthcare environment.
Yeah.
So their largest clients, as you can imagine, would be healthcare payers. Your biggest payers on the market. And although they're global and have enterprise customers from everyone,
Yeah.
the Pepsi Corps and the Exxons and
Sure.
so forth. But concentrating on the healthcare space, I mean, providers picked it up, and really, I kind of say it became, from a claims processing standpoint, the battle of the bots,
Hmm.
right? So the payers had the bots to automate all this and push back claim denials and push back prior authorization denials and all of these things. And the providers were getting swamped with this activity. The activity shooting through the roof, and now all of a sudden, regulatory wise, they've decided they're going to pull in prior authorization for just about every drug, every procedure.
Yeah.
Uh, Providers didn't have the labor to keep up with it, and so what happened with not only this movement between 16, 17, 18, and 19 of trying to implement automation technology, then you have the pandemic happen, and this space just exploded, Mike. I
Yeah.
mean, those that had the capability on the provider side was a dynamic, picture and difference of how the response could work for responding to something in need to scale immediately at mass,
Yeah.
to either A, first roll out testing, or B, second, later in the year roll out vaccinations. The ability to handle that kind of load when they're just launching a web registration form and saying, hey, Dallas community, go register for a
Yeah.
vaccination. How do they get that to the clinical record,
Right.
right? Or they've got to have it in the clinical record before they hit it in the arm, right? So the commercial entities, and so the big ones, right, the CVSs and Walgreens, I mean, they have armies of enterprise IT people, right?
Right.
So they can, but the providers themselves came to us and said, see, we didn't have any capacity in the first place. We were already 15 FTE short in this
Yeah.
department, right? How
Yeah.
are we going to do this? And we got a call on December 31st, December 23rd. I'll just always remember this. There were 2 ways for Christmas. They're saying, hey, look, it's a
Yeah.
pandemic, and like Christmas Day, we were having meetings on Christmas Day. I'm like, well, did that back to, what you signed up for? I'm like,
Right.
okay, I'm not sure my kids want me to get on a
Yeah.
phone call on Christmas Day. But anyway, we get a call. It's about the vaccination aspect of rolling out vaccinations and registrations. This system, they have 7 hospitals. They're a very large urban system, one of the top 5 in the country. They say, look, we've run through about 9,000 of our 30,000 employees. We think we can make it through there, but then we have no idea how we're going to go to the front line, to the fire, police, and everybody after that.
Yeah.
Right. And remember, most communities started at 70 and then 65 and so forth.
Sure.
And they said, look, we're just going to throw a web registration form out there to their existing base of customers, which is in the millions already, at least on record with their EMR. And we're going to start to, disseminate basically these emails in stages that we know their age and so forth. But we have no idea how to get back into the registration piece prior to you showing up, right?
Yeah.
So we built an automation. It took 3 days. By December 29th, we had an automation, scraped all the data out of the web registration form, threw it back into a Tableau system for reporting up to executives and monitoring
Yeah.
this every day. So nobody could have handled rekeying that information.
Right.
When they're signing 60,000 vaccination cards a day. There's all kinds of great opportunities and great success stories that came from that. But I just wanted to highlight, repetitive process automation and this whole task desktop, repetitive task automation business. It's on fire because of the pandemic, and there's so much, I think, great change that has, fortunately, we've taken the opportunity for now that we've learned our lesson a little bit about one set of executives out of one hospital that had the capability versus one set of executives out of another hospital that didn't have the capability, and they know each other and they looking at each other going, oh yeah, you had this capability, we need to buy this capability. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the cool part of the automation.
Yeah. That's cool. I've been really paying attention, and partly because of, well, just my own interest in tech space, but just in the last few years of picking up the team that does all our marketing automation, and just really paying attention to the focus of automation and that point that you made around using systems to do things that people just can't do. Or they could do, but you have to have such a scale of people that
Mm,
it doesn't work financially, right? Like to even do the stuff. And I feel
right.
like that this, having something like an RPA system or any kind of automation around stuff, it probably opens you up for a business that you didn't think you could do before. Maybe you have a, maybe
Oh,
you,
absolutely.
there's an area of your business that the one thing that's stopping you is the ability to like, you have a home, maybe you have a homegrown, back end office system of some sort that you're using for financials, which surprisingly tons of people have those, or a homegrown whatever system, and it's never going to integrate with anything because they wrote it, 20 years ago, and you've been stuck using it forever. And I can't tell you how many places I've been. I'm sure you are, where you watch the guys at, you go to the car dealership as an example. I mean, I can't tell you. I'm like, why do you still have a DOS prompt like a screen that you're having to key and tab things into to put in that I need an oil change? Like that should be pretty easy to do. But there's a lot of companies that have that, and they just can't invest in the time and effort to get off of that system.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that this is that's is having these type of tools that help you, automate some of those processes, between those two things, with maybe even getting them in the process of switching to the new system. It's like,
Yeah.
can you automate
Yeah.
the migration to something else in where you would normally have to key in? Because I've had to do this, like sit down and automate. You know, can you automate taking content off an old website and put it on a new website? Instead of having to have people copy and paste or do export imports and stuff like that. I mean, just there's so many, as you talk about it, I get really excited about it, which I did the last time we talked about it, because I was like, oh, I got to find a way to use this because I really want to. But there's just so many possibilities for a tool like that,
Mhm.
in so many spaces, because there's always, no matter where you go, no matter what company it is, no matter how sophisticated you think the company is. I mean, hell, Amazon, you think they're sophisticated? I guarantee you they have an army of people on a floor somewhere that are doing a repetitive task, that could be probably automated in some way and have somebody just monitor the automation, and it's just they haven't seen it or thought about, how do we do that, right?
Yeah. Well, you kind of hit it right where there's systems that enterprises and retailers and hospitals that are still living off of that are 40 years old,
Yeah,
right? Or even more. That ultimately, um, the the aspect of getting off of that particular application or business from, the cost of moving it over,
yeah,
or there's just not a driver that's big enough for
sure.
them to make that change, or there's a timing element to it that could just it just continues to impede them. You see that opportunity. You see opportunities where, like I mentioned, where there's just a rapid need for a big movement of data migration,
Yeah,
or obviously vaccine automations, where immediately there is no API.
yeah,
There's nothing, there's no other option than to have somebody sit in front of there and move the data, move the mouse, and move the keystrokes.
right.
So um, where the really cool thing is like you were talking about opportunity with new business, is now beyond. If I can write the business rules and I don't need cognitive process and I don't need a pair of eyeballs to it, but I have AI aspects or some kind
Hmm.
of machine learning model to be additive to that process, boy, then I can really hit the accelerator for what that new process looks like and what maybe revenue opportunities come from it. I'll give you an example. Today, when you apply for a credit card, there is absolutely some type of RPA behind that is checking all of the external systems for
Yeah,
you out there in the internet, um, looking for maybe either you could think of it in bad terms or good terms, like a blacklist or whitelist.
yeah,
So if you look at, you may have a credit card, you may be opening a credit card, and you're the niece of some famous person or politician. They actually want to put you on a whitelist to make sure that you're going to fast track in their
yeah,
process, or maybe you again are checked against some credit issue or other things that
Sure.
may be a part of that account opening process. So there's all kinds of opportunity where you can inject some of the other elements of going to check other foreign systems and now introducing that to accelerate the process and make some revenue from it. So yeah, very interesting proposition. And what's kind of happening from this whole space is we're pulling offshore enabled processes now back to the US,
Yeah.
or at least from a US market perspective, where they want to own the automation and they want to own the reduction in cost of that process. So they're
Right.
pulling some of those offshore processes back into the US for the largest companies. That's starting to really take effect. And this, getting over the labor arbitrage story, now software's doing it.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting. Um,
yeah,
I didn't, I've heard the cry from people like Andrew Yang out there that automation is going to take everybody's jobs. Um, I think there are going to be certain jobs and so forth out there that automation will take, but I think if
yeah,
people are smart about what they're thinking about and doing, that they can put themselves in a position where they can reuse those people for something else that's of higher value. It's like,
yeah,
how much value are you getting out of somebody for 20 years clicking a mouse between this button and copying and pasting, and there's so
yeah,
many opportunities. And I try to look at this for myself when I'm just doing things on my own. Like anytime we have an opportunity or chance to look at a process, or we're reevaluating how we're doing something, like we go back. I make my team, we go back to the beginning. We're like, where does this start and how are we doing this today? Because there's probably something in there that we thought was a great idea 4 years ago that we just do every day, and we're like, why do we don't need to do that. Like, let's just cut that out, or let's automate that in some way, right? And even if it's, I've been focusing a lot around automation of fail safes and catching things. And so in the marketing world, of where I'm applying that is to start to look at how can I um, catch people in scenarios that are not a high volume, in terms of, you wouldn't be able to pull a list from Salesforce and say, here's 100 people that fit the scenario this week. Whether they're, like a disqualified lead, they got disqualified, but they keep coming back to our website, or they got disqualified and they did, two other things. There's a couple, or we have an external data source that comes in and says, hey, you should look at them. They're in market for whatever you're selling. There's not a huge volume of those kind of people that are going to show up on a list anywhere, but there's enough of them that if you take a half a day and write some automation around it, that you can get those people back into your main list of people that you can market to and work with. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for automation, not so much in like the automating all the big stuff, but automate all the stuff that you're not going to do, like that you can't pay attention to. And if you write enough automation rules around some of the smaller things that are happening out there, and maybe it's even data correcting, right? Like with the RPA, I mean, just spitballing some ideas here, but maybe it's just data validation. Maybe you've got a system that you can't validate that the date's formatted correctly, and maybe you can have this system go and check it and fix it. It's like just those kind of things that are really small things, but over the big picture of a year can add huge amounts of value to an organization.
So you hit it on the head with a couple of examples I'll give you, and that one of the or a few of the most popular items that we start with in the revenue cycle back office is charity write-offs and low balance accounts.
Okay.
So they want to get those off, right? And if they're due a refund as well, right? And
Yeah.
they have thousands of accounts. It's this long tail. Just the area under that tail is a volume,
Yeah.
right? Is a volume that they can't get to. They would much rather work the 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 or
Right.
greater claim, right? And make sure that those are corrected correctly. They just don't have the labor for it. So you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. That's one of the most popular things we're doing is charity write-offs, low balance, penny claim, all that stuff that they don't have the labor force to do, but from a regulatory standpoint, they're required to do in some cases, or penalized if they
Sure.
are audited against it and don't have it done. So yeah, those are absolutely good cases and examples for the healthcare RCM story.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of, like we've been talking about. I mean, there's all kinds of things where you can generate revenue too from those little things that you can't get to.
Yeah.
Generate
Yeah.
good stuff. So
Cool.
yeah.
Well, I want to be aware of cognizant of time and make sure I'm respectful of that. And I know we had an hour booked for today, so um, a couple questions for you, just
Got it.
general stuff. You seem to be pretty calm and collective most of the time. You seem to be not a super stressed out guy. Maybe that's maybe that's your nice facade, but what do you do to relax? What do you do to de-stress? I mean, how do you handle, like, you're running a company, there's a lot riding on your shoulders between you and Sean and what you guys do. So how do you manage your stress levels, and what do you do there?
Well, recently the answer is golf.
Okay.
Uh, for the most part, it's golf. I love golf, and it's mostly going. If it's just literally, I got to get out and kind of de-stress. I want to go to the range.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, golf takes a lot of time if you're going to dedicate a whole round to do it with the
Sure.
boys or whatever. But that's also changed, right? So I just graduated my youngest from high school
Okay.
2 weekends ago now, and so now we're empty nesters in the fall. We've got one at Oklahoma, one in Baylor, and one that's out of college already in Boston. And that used to be another answer, right? But those
Yeah.
days are past, and my wife's like, "Uh-oh, I'm gonna have to jump in and play some golf." So
Yeah.
she's gonna be golf widow.
Yeah. Well, congrats on that. Getting successful kids out the door there. That's a big achievement. My kids, I actually had to arrange because I had to send them next door. Luckily, my sister lucky enough to live next door, and so I had to send them over there because they're 9 and 7 right now, and they are just full on summer mode. They're
Yeah.
bored. They're they're mad at you. They're mad at me. They're mad at the world. They're mad at mom. They're mad at each other. It's just like bickering all day, and it's been raining like crazy here in Dallas, and so they can't go outside and do anything because it's just miserable. But
Yeah.
yeah, I always think about that. I'm like, what was my life like before the kids? And what's my life going to be like after the kids? And like, should I start planning for those moments of like, what am I going to do when the kids are grown and gone? Because I'm sure you can say that like it's going to happen faster than I want it to.
Yeah, definitely squeeze out all you can, right? Enjoy, and those
Yeah,
are great ages, right? Those are great ages, and definitely just sink into all that and your vacation times with them and all
sure.
that. I think my most memorable thing, I think us as a family, is just the vacations that we take,
Yeah,
and um, you know, all the memories that come from those vacations. Because, like you said, when you're at home and it's like I'm working, and they're a little bit of a hard thing to handle sometimes. So,
yeah,
uh, yeah, my brother has 5 kids. The other day, and I was like, oh, this is tough, right? So it's
yeah,
like I can't believe. I mean, I had 3, and it's funny. Most people say 3 is the hardest number because
yeah,
there's not enough coverage. Um, once one of the oldest ones gets up, right, it starts to be more coverage. But
yeah,
the coverage model when they're 4, 2, and 1, is not great.
yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, that has been nice. My daughter's gotten older, so now she's like, on a Saturday or something, if we want to lay in bed for an extra hour, it's like she can make breakfast and not burn the kitchen down. And so that's been nice, helpful moments recently. So, but speaking of kitchens, we got to talk barbecue because we talk barbecue every once in a while. So, let's talk brisket or ribs, which is your favorite? And let's talk about deep dark secrets of how you make your ribs or brisket, whichever one's your favorite.
Well, I'll tell you the secret, and I just probably did the best brisket this weekend that I've done in the history of this Traeger that I've owned for now 6 years.
Okay, I'm taking
And,
notes.
and I don't Well, I don't want to throw any big grocery chain under the bus, but I'll do them because they're both equally, pretty big chains here in Texas, H-E-B and Kroger. You
Yeah.
guys have pretty big presence of Kroger up there in Dallas?
We've got Kroger mostly. Well, in my area, I've got a Kroger. It's across town, but Tom Thumb is.
Yeah, Tom Thumb, I
Yeah,
remember. There's no Tom Thumb down here, which is interesting, and there's no
yeah,
Albertsons. Albertsons pulled out years ago. Um, there's some Safeway related chains like Randall's and such. But
yeah.
anyway, my two are H-E-B and Kroger. Um, but there is a butcher shop that just opened up. I mean, just this
Okay.
classic
Yeah,
butcher shop, modernized with all the barbecue amenities and high dollar rubs that you'd want.
yeah.
All the high dollar pellet. Actually, their pellets are on par with. They have different varieties than Ace, but Ace,
Okay.
pellets is where I usually buy pellets. I usually get the premium pellet mix, which is a mesquite, an oak, I think, and a pecan.
Okay.
Uh, well, anyway, I ended up over this place, and they have a Jack Daniel's pellet now. I don't know if you
Okay.
knew that. It comes from the charcoal that they, that's the whole
Yeah.
thing with Tennessee whiskey, right? It's a charcoal filter. So they're black. They're black pellets. They're mostly
Yeah.
oak based, but
Okay.
they've got this charcoal element, so they're black pellet. Anyway, I mixed some of that together. But anyway, that wasn't the reason. The reason is they have of course your top premium briskets in the Wagyu style section, but then they've got some primes that come out of a farm in South Texas. And so that was about what I wanted to pay. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't usually go more than $50, right? When in the
Right.
stores, 50, 55, maybe
Yeah.
60. And then there's some Wagyus or whatever the antibiotic one is, the um, what do they call those? Anyway, I think they're selling stuff. They have the grass-fed one, right?
Yeah.
And then
Sure.
they get over 80, right? Anyway, I ended up on this brand or product was called Elite Prime,
Okay.
and it's out of a farm that they have, like I said, in South Texas. And I don't even remember if it's an Angus style brisket, but he's like, man, you won't go wrong with this. I was like, great. I pulled it out, of course, the little cooler there that they had in this place. I hand it to him. This was the beauty too. He was like, oh no, we trim it up for free. No worries. We'll
Oh,
even
wow.
put your favorite rub on it. I was like, well, let me do the rub. You do the
Yeah.
hard work and trim it out. He's like, all right, competition style. I was like, yeah, competition style. Of course, I was sitting watching between me and the glass, and he's behind there, and I'm like, hell, he took $20 off already.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he made it the prettiest thing you ever saw. I take it home. I'm like, honey, look at this thing. I had to spend an hour, because I usually am really,
Yeah. I'm the
really
same.
careful. At all.
Yeah.
Hey, look, I paid $60. Let's make fun out of this.
All right.
Anyway, I hope he doesn't take all the fun away and I do this again. But the essence of it is they trimmed it up. It's beautiful, Mike. Boy, that thing shrunk up like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
But man, I pulled it off. I did it over 2 days, which sometimes I do, right? I'll take it through basically the high point of the stall. I'll take it
Okay.
off. In this case, it was about 5.5 hours. Stuffed it in a cooler bag, put it in the fridge, pulled it back out the next morning around 8 o'clock because I had a meal to serve at 2:30.
Okay.
No, excuse me, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and
Yeah.
I had my daughter's dance event. So
Okay.
this is the fine art of, I don't want to be up all
Balancing
night,
it all. Yeah. Yeah.
certainly, right? But I got to pull it and then restart it. So I take it up to the top end of the stall. It was like 170. I put it back in the fridge. I get it back up, and then it's more of a linear, right? I don't have to go
Yeah.
through the stall part. So I took it straight up to 211. I always go a little bit past. I mean, everybody
Okay.
says 204, right?
Yeah.
I go past. I break through that. I'm poking it. I want it a little bit more tender in the middle
Yeah.
because I don't like getting in the middle and like it's just like,
It's chewy.
that's not a. It's a
Yeah.
little, it's just not enough. So, man, this thing. I mean, I literally had that party that afternoon. This
Okay.
was Sunday afternoon. Yeah, just a few days ago. And people like, I don't care. Franklin's can have his stuff. This is the best damn brisket we've ever had. I was like, it is. It really is. It's good brisket. It was just
Yeah.
perfect. It's the meat. It wasn't meat. It was just the meat. I mean, the
Yeah.
quality of the meat is the end of my story with these guys was just unbelievable. So
Yeah.
anyway, I told Sean's going to go over there and pick one up, and
Yeah.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I've found that's the key now. Of all the things, so I've been very meticulous about trying to buy the same or do follow the exact same process for the last five briskets that I've done. And
Okay.
what I've uncovered, and I was making sure I was doing that just so I had a control point, and I wanted to see is it really the meat or is it something I'm doing in the process, right? And so I'm using the same. I have a Kamado style, like one of the big 24-inch Kamado size ceramic deals, and so I use lump charcoal in there. I'm using the same brand of lump charcoal every time. I'm going through the same process for how I start it. I'm how much charcoal I put into it. Like I have like a line of where I'll put this much in there. So I'm trying to control as much of that stuff as I can because I wanted to really see like
Yeah.
is there something I'm doing in the process that's making it better or worse? Because some of them have come out and they've just been like my wife is like this is the greatest barbecue I've ever had. And she's pretty brutal. Like she'll be like this is shit.
Yeah. Good.
Let's give away as much of this as we
Yeah, my
can to the
wife is
neighbors.
honest. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I'm like, okay. Uh, but because I'm like, hey, I'm trying to get better at this. So, anyways, I'm doing all the process, and I'll the night before, in my process, I trim the night before, usually like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I'll trim, and I cut. I was cutting the decal that's between the point and the flat. I was cutting that all out really well, trimming it up really well, but leaving a lot of fat on the bottom,
Mhm.
just so it stays juicy. And then I'll do a rub it's a homemade rub that I do, which is just smoked paprika, fresh peppercorns ground up, and salt, kosher salt. Mix all that up, and I have equal parts of all that stuff. And I measure it out and everything, and then I will coat it with that, and I'll wrap it in Saran wrap, and I'll throw it in the fridge. And I've heard some people say, well, if you put it in salt like that overnight, that it's gonna like dry it out or whatever. I've never had it dry out or anything like that. I've had it like it just feels like it soaks it in really well.
Yeah.
Um, and so I throw it in the fridge, and then the next morning I usually cook, and I do the cook all in one. So it was interesting to hear you say you stopped at some point, because I may have to try that. Because I always run into the problem of like everybody's like, well, when's dinner? And I'm like, well, dinner's when it's done. Like that's when dinner is. And they're like, well, what time is that? And I'm like, when it's done. Okay.
You're a
Yeah.
smoker. That's what the answer.
The answer is it's done when it's done. If you want to eat it, you can eat it tomorrow. If you want to, I can guarantee it'll be ready tomorrow for
Yeah.
lunch, but you're gonna have to
And
reheat it.
with the brisket, I mean, if you want it early, you got to get up, early in
Yeah,
the morning. Yeah, this absolutely works. You can
yeah,
you can stop it at the top end of the stall or somewhere middle stall, depending on how much time you need left on the next day. But
yeah,
I've never had it not work out, and probably done 10 that way.
yeah. Do you wrap it in peach paper when you put it back in the second time? Okay.
I do. So
Yeah,
I wrap it in the paper, put it in, and it's ready to just kind of go right on.
yeah. But
Yeah.
what I've found in all this is it's the meat. It's 100% the meat. Like that's going to separate you from the good stuff and the bad stuff. Like you can go to Kroger's, Tom Thumb, or Albertsons, wherever, Walmart. I mean, hell, you can go to these places and get a brisket. Um, but it comes down to like it's got to be a good cut. The
Well, I
more,
told you that after this experience, because I had never really done much other than HEB and Kroger,
yeah,
and um, and Sean had told me about Costco's,
yeah,
being pretty. But this was just literally strides ahead of
yeah,
everything I did. So
yeah.
it was good.
The problems with the Costco ones is like you get those are the like you can go get the choice prime like cut ones from Costco. The problem is
Yeah.
they're the size of a dinosaur leg. Like they're
Really?
massive. Like I got one time that was like 20 pounds or something. I mean, it was just massive. Um, and it was good. I mean, it was like $100, for the brisket. But I was like, well, I'm feeding a bunch of people. Let me get a big one. And it barely fit on like it was pushed up against the edge of a 24-inch smoker, which is
Wow.
like
Yeah.
22 inches basically on the inside.
Sure.
Great. But yeah, it's 100% the meat, man. I've tried Costco. I've tried uh,
Yeah.
all these different places, and there's a local barbecue joint up here in Grand Prairie that is starting to do a thing where they're doing a pop-up class, and it's free to go. And their big selling point is they'll sell you a brisket from this place called 44 Farms. It's up here in North Texas, like local. It's like, I think it's in the Denton area, and it's fresh briskets. They bring them down,
I've heard of
um,
it. Yeah.
and they will, that's what that you buy it. You buy the brisket and you get the class for free. And so they have
Oh
all their
wow.
pit masters come out and they help you trim it and they help you season it, make sure everything. They'll wrap it, and you sit around, talk to them, and chat about all the stuff we just talked about. Everybody can argue over 204 versus 200 versus put it in a Yeti cooler, and how you
Yeah.
cool it and all that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna probably do that soon to go, just because I want to try one of those really nice pieces of meat. So
Well, it's interesting you said, taking the middle out, taking the decal out of the middle. I'd usually get it almost all out, right? So it's perfectly flat.
yeah,
This guy, again, he was like, "Oh, competition cut." I was like, whatever. And he was like, "Hey, I left some of that in to make sure that the point was balanced and didn't dry out." And I
yeah,
thought, it's interesting. So I haven't been. I'd love to go to one of these classes and just kind of ask a bunch of questions, and certainly done a lot of YouTubing on it, but
oh yeah,
uh, been doing it, enough now that I've gotten a pattern, but I'm not keeping the lab book like you are
yeah,
quite. I still am. I seem to always want a little experiment, like with something different. But I completely agree. I think we could safely say it's the meat. So
yeah. All right.
cool.
Well, we can end on that. We can end
Yeah.
on it's all in the meat. Is
Yeah.
there anything you want to plug? Websites, social media? I mean, anything else that we can plug on here if folks are still hanging in?
No, I'm good. We just enjoyed it. Appreciate you always being a partner with us.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, man.
Cool.
All
See
right.
you, buddy.
Good talking to you, man.
Bye.